Throughout Donald Trump's presidency, his wife's name was rarely heard. Melania avoided public appearances, did not actively participate in election campaigns, and practically disappeared from view. And suddenly, quite unexpectedly, Trump is talking about her from the stage at the University of Alabama. Without preparation, without being asked. He admitted it himself. Melania asked him not to. What's more, she would supposedly be angry and humiliated. But he's doing it anyway. Why all of a sudden? Why, after all this time, is Melania becoming part of his rhetoric again? The answer, oddly enough, lies not in the family, but in the courts. More specifically, in a legal battle with Maine's governor, Janet Mills, who has directly refused to comply with Trump's threats. This story began with a discussion about the rights of transgender students in schools. Janet Mills stated that she would comply with both state and federal laws. In response, Trump, no longer president at the time, threatened to block funding for all schools in the state. He went even further. He predicted the end of Mills' political career, threatened a lawsuit, and expressed doubt that she would ever be elected again. But the case didn't turn out the way he hoped. You are watching Forgotten Roads. If you care about honest stories about those who challenge power, support us. Subscriptions help us stay independent. And now, let's find out how the governor of a small state fought back against a former U.S. president. The story began with a simple question. Does Maine have to comply with federal regulations protecting the rights of transgender school children? By law, yes. And Governor Janet Mills was going to enforce that law. But Trump didn't like it. During one of his public appearances, he had harsh words for her. Said that if she didn't comply, Maine would lose federal funding. "You won't get another dime," came from the podium. He tried to intimidate not only her personally, but the entire state. It got to the point of threatening, enjoy life after the governorship, because you're never going to be in politics again. But threats are one thing. Reality is another. Mills didn't back down. She didn't come out apologizing. She didn't cave. She just said, "I'll see you in court." And as it turns out, she did indeed face the Trump administration in federal court, and won. The court ordered the Department of Agriculture, which was then controlled by Trump, to restore funding for child nutrition programs in Maine, despite the political controversy. In other words, to punish the governor, Trump was willing to take away breakfast, lunch, and dinner from children. But he wasn't allowed to. And this wasn't just one man's victory over the system. It was a signal. Fear doesn't work anymore. People are starting to say no, even governors of small states. Let's go on and find out how this defeat for Trump turned into a real public crisis and derailed his performance. Thanks, among other things, to his own wife. After his defeat in court, Trump looked particularly vulnerable. He's used to threats working, that if you say it loud enough, everyone will bend. But Janet Mills wasn't afraid. She didn't just beat back the attack. She put the administration in a legal limbo. And this situation was just another in a string of failures. Publicly, Trump is losing more and more often. His cases are collapsing in court one after another. He can no longer push through the will as he used to, and he feels it. That's why his speeches are increasingly hysterical. That's why there are more and more outlandish outbursts. He no longer dominates, he reacts. And more often than not, aggressively. And so, at a moment when he was supposed to be talking about politics, he suddenly turns to an argument about transgender athletes. He brings up competitions, Olympic disciplines, and starts talking emotionally about how men are supposedly destroying women's records. All of this is in an exaggerated, almost caricatured form. And then he suddenly mentions his wife. Melania hates it when I do that. She says it's unseemly, it's not presidential. But of course, he does it anyway, makes fun of it, exaggerates, talks in a fake voice, and yet he's supposedly doing it for Mom. The scene turns grotesque. And at this point, it becomes clear. He's not in control of his emotions. He's snapping. Trump says publicly that his wife finds his behavior embarrassing, and he continues. He self-destructs. Live on air. This is no longer strength. it's weakness. If this episode with Melania was just an awkward disclaimer, it could have been forgotten. But Trump made a whole show out of it, and everything pointed to one thing. He used his wife's name as a shield, a cover for his own insecurity and fear of losing influence. He knew he was losing every day, not only in court, but in the eyes of the public. His speeches became increasingly emotional, filled not with facts, but with irritation and complaints. On stage, he says, "My wife says it's not presidential, but I'm going to do it anyway." And he actually does. He starts imitating an athlete who supposedly couldn't take a punch from a transgender opponent, mimics the voice, facial expressions, gestures, and he laughs. The audience laughs with him. But this laughter is not from strength, but from absurdity. The audience sees a man who goes too far. He says Melania will be disappointed, that she will be ashamed. He bluntly says, "She hates it when I do this." And he keeps doing it. For whom? For what? Melania, as we know, has long distanced herself from political activity. She doesn't give interviews, she doesn't give speeches, and doesn't seem to want to be part of his new campaign. But Trump still uses her name to cover his own failures. He speaks for her as if she agrees with his positions, even though everything points to the opposite. And it's in this insincerity, this internal conflict, you can see it. He's losing control even over his inner circle. At first glance, all this noise around transgender athletes seems impulsive. But behind the outbursts of emotion, Trump has a clear political calculation. He has said more than once that he is not personally interested in the issue of transgender rights, but he thinks it could win him political points. This is his tactic, to create fear, to stir up conflict, to divide society. He thinks that attacking LGBTQ+ people is an easy way to gain sympathy from a certain electorate. He doesn't analyze how dangerous or violent it is. He looks at ratings. But this time his bet played against him. When he tried to punish an entire state for refusing to submit to his views, he not only lost the trial, he started to look petty, vindictive, and dangerous to ordinary people. Because this wasn't just about athletes. It was about children deprived of nutrition just because their governor dared to defend the law. And what does he do after he loses? He turns to jokes, theater, starts mocking women who couldn't take a punch, female athletes who were pushed aside. He makes fun of transgender people, but he does so tentatively. He's nervous, sarcastic, gesticulating, and at the end, himself saying that Melania is mad. This no longer looks like a confident leader. This is a man who is losing influence and trying to cover it up with loud phrases and stage behavior. But increasingly, the audience sees it. And laughter becomes not a support, but a reaction to a strange and pathetic show. While Trump is failing in the courts, losing influence and making a mockery of himself in public appearances, his political opponents are not silent. One of those who have clearly realized that the time has come is Bernie Sanders. In a recent speech, he voiced what is being silenced in Congress and on television. He wasn't talking about the minutia. He was talking about the root. America no longer works for the majority. 60% of people live from paycheck to paycheck. The real income of the average American is lower than it was 50 years ago. Yet labor productivity has gone up, and everything that's earned goes into the pockets of the richest. Bernie calls it what it is, an economic war against the working class. He's explicitly demanding the repeal of Citizens United, which gave billionaires the ability to buy elections. He demands public financing of campaigns. He demands a clear choice. Either you're with the people or you're with the oligarchs. And that's where the contrast comes in. On one side is Trump, who jokes, croaks, and throws his wife under the bus. On the other are the people who cite the real reasons for the anger in the streets. And if the Democrats don't make the choice in favor of ordinary citizens, they will lose forever. Bernie reminds us that the fight isn't just about domestic policy. He mentions Ukraine and Putin's dictatorship and says, "We either stand for democracy or we let tyranny win." At Forgotten Roads, we make a choice too. We choose to speak out, without fear. If you're with us, subscribe, because silence is not a stance.